I made $4,083 last month with CS2 Trade Ups, and I didn't just get lucky. I consistently found profitable combinations. In this video, I'll explain exactly how trade ups work and share all of the secrets that I'm using to maximize returns. The best part is, you can get started with as little as $1 or scale it up according to your budget. In short, trade ups let you exchange 10 items of the same rarity for one skin from the next tier up. So 10 mil specs become 1 restricted, 10 restricted become 1 classified, and so on. The exception to this is you only need 5 covert skins to trade up to a gold. While you can mix the float values and collections of trade up inputs, and this is actually an essential part of finding profitable ones, you cannot mix rarities. If you want to do a stat track trade up, all 10 inputs must also be stat track, and you cannot use souvenir skins. So how exactly do we find profitable ones?
Before we continue, this video's sponsor, SkinSwap, is giving you a skin worth up to $50 entirely for free whenever you do your first trade and use my referral code. If you want to refresh your loadout, you can trade your skins for brand new ones in just a couple of seconds. Plus, the new Chinese markets feature lets you purchase cheap skins from Chinese sites directly, without the need for a Chinese ID or bank account. They accept deposits via crypto, MasterCard, and Visa. If you need to cash out, SkinSwap makes that simple too, with instant sell options to PayPal or crypto. On top of that, they run free daily, weekly, and monthly giveaways, with the chance to earn extra tickets simply by trading. Use my link or referral code for a 3% lifetime sales bonus and a free skin worth up to $50. Big thanks to SkinSwap for supporting the channel. The biggest mistake people make all the time is simply putting in skins from their inventory that they may have unboxed or received as drops and hoping for something good. If I just go and click a bunch of skins that I have at random, you'll see that for this contract that will cost me $98, the expected value is just $36.8, an average loss of 63%. And there's only one output with just a 5% chance that actually profits. So most of the time, I'd lose money. We obviously want to avoid this, and even better, inverse it so that the expected value is actually greater than the cost of our inputs. Now, here's where things get interesting. The float value and odds of each output isn't random. It's directly tied to the number of inputs from each collection and their average float. First, let's break down how the probabilities are calculated. Every skin you add to the contract is responsible for 10% of the outputs. So if you add 10 skins from a single collection, you'll have equal chances at any of the outputs from that collection. And if, for example, we mix 5 restricted skins from the Fever collection and 5 restricted skins from the Rising Sun collection, we'd have 50-50 chances to hit each collection, but because the Fever has 3 coverts, that 50% would be split evenly amongst the outputs from that collection. Pretty straightforward. Next, we need to understand how floats work. While every skin has a float, a number between 0 and 1, which determines which wear category it falls into, not all skins are obtainable in every wear. For example, the popular M4A1S Blue Phosphor has a float cap of 0.08, so it is only obtainable in minimal wear and factory new conditions. Sometimes these float caps can work in our favor by actually allowing us to use higher float and usually cheaper items to obtain lower float outputs. Let's say I wanted to trade up to a Blue Phosphor, which is part of the Control collection. If I had 10 UMP crime scenes in battle scarred condition, the M4 would still come out in factory new. On the other hand, some limited float ranges can actually make it really hard to trade up for, which is the case with the whiteout skins, for example, which only start at 0.06. Meaning their entire float range for factory new is just 0.06 to 0.07, and capped at 0.8. So you can see that even if we put in 10 factory new CZ syndicates, we'd only get a minimal wear whiteout as a result. In fact, our input floats would actually need to be less than 0.00945 in order to get a USP right on the border of factory new with a 0.06999 float. To fully understand how the float value of the outcome is determined, we need to use this formula. I know it looks a little complicated, but let's break it down. To get the float value of our output item, we need to take its float range into account, multiply it by the adjusted float of each input, and then add it to the minimum possible float of our output. If we take our whiteout example from before and plug in the values, this is what we'd get. Of course, this is a simplified example as all of the inputs are identical, but you get the gist. There are a number of online calculators to choose from, each with their own benefits that I'll link in the description, so you'll never have to do this calculation manually. My personal favorites are CS Float, Skin Search, and CS2 Locker, which actually has a reverse button,
meaning you can select your output skin and desired float, and it will tell you the required input floats without you having to plug and play like the others. Another important thing to consider is that while we are aiming for specific float outputs, you do not need to necessarily put in 10 identical float inputs to get the desired average. So even if you're aiming for a factory new output, you might be able to sneak in some minwares or even a field tested input to save yourself some money and increase your margins, as long as the average works out. At the end of the day, making money with Tradeups comes down to one thing: expected value, or EV. That's your profit or loss over the long run. If the EV of the trade up is positive, which means the price of the outputs multiplied by their respective probabilities is higher than the cost of the inputs, you are statistically likely to make money in the long run. The reason I like the Skin Search Trade Up Calculator in particular is it pulls real-time price data from a ton of skin sites to give you the most up-to-date numbers. To be clear though, even with a positive expected value, nothing is guaranteed. Trade-ups are still a form of gambling and should be considered as such. Just because you have an 80% chance to profit and 150% EV does not mean you will. So with all that being said, how do you actually find profitable trade-ups? The first easy method is by visiting sites like TradeUp Lab or TradeUp Spy. TradeUp Lab publishes Combination Daily and TradeUp Spy Weekly. TradeUp King is another option, although from my experience, the floats they use as inputs are often extremely hard to find. You can also watch videos on YouTube or take a look at Reddit, although many combinations, once published online for a large audience, quickly become unprofitable since all of the viable inputs get bought up. Of course, start with the pre-made contracts, but remember, just because these sites give you specific combinations doesn't mean you can't potentially swap out other skins from the same collection that may be cheaper, or test out different float combinations based on the items you're able to find available right now. I also find that recently released or recently discontinued collections often have a lot of opportunities. In my Nothing to a Butterfly Knife video, you'll see I spammed the same contract from the Ascent collection about 30 times, as there was a huge price discrepancy between the mil specs and restricted, given it was a fairly recently added collection. At the end of the video, I also took advantage of the huge price spikes in some of the higher tier skins from the graphic design collection, which had just been removed from the armory. This heightened demand on announcements or low supply on new collections can mean prices haven't quite balanced out yet. Skins that have had their prices manipulated or seen a recent surge in popularity may also have opportunities, although have greater risk associated. For example, when the M4A4 Hellfire was getting pumped, I was able to make several $1,000s just by repeating this trade up. One of the general strategies to maximize profit is to mix higher float items from more expensive collections with lower float items from cheaper ones. For example, let's say we wanted to use classified skins from the gallery collection to go for a factory new M4 Vaporwave. Well, if we put in 10 factory new UMP Neo Noirs, it would cost us around $362. Plus, right now this trade up has a negative EV with our average return sitting at $255. However, if you're paying close attention, you'll see that both the M4 and Glock come out with lower floats than the adjusted input float of 0.05, since both of them are float capped. So let's use that to our advantage. If I try swapping a couple of the UMPs out for low float field tested and 2 minimal wears, our cost will significantly decrease, and suddenly an unprofitable trade up has become a profitable one with a 112% EV. We'd still obtain factory new outputs despite our average adjusted input being 0.095. And if I swapped out some of those expensive UMP Neo Noirs for cheaper XM Entombed, or the same float with one exception, the profitability actually reaches 139%. Of course, you might have to pay a bit extra for lower float inputs, but play around and see which items you can find and which prices work out. At this point, you want to know where you can find these skins at reasonable prices and at the required floats. Of course, you can use the Steam community market, and the fact that lots of Steam market sellers don't even look at float values means you can occasionally find low float items at great prices. If you use the CS Float Market Checker extension, you can easily add a filter for a specific float range on any item and sort by floats as well. However, the main sites I use to find skins are SkinSwap, TradeIt, Skinport, and CSFloat. Each is good for a different reason. SkinSwap and TradeIt are great because they do not factor in floats in their pricing and have large volumes of items. On TradeIt, for example, I like to favorite the inputs I'm looking for, and then a few times a day I'll simply enter the desired float range into the filters and look if any new skins are added. Skinport is the middle ground because while many sellers do not necessarily list their low float items for a higher price, their lower volume means less competition and usually slightly higher pricing. Finally, while CSFloat is a great site for buying items, sellers on this platform are usually a lot more aware of when certain float skins should be priced higher, and their recommended pricing system even accounts for this automatically. A big advantage of CS Float though is the ability to set buy orders. You can simply set up an order for your desired collection, rarity, and float range, set the maximum price you're willing to pay based on your calculations, and then you'll automatically purchase any new items that meet those parameters. You'll find links for all of these sites in the description. Just make sure you do not neglect fees in your calculations. If you're buying and selling your items on Steam, you're going to lose 13% of the outcome value as Steam tax. Alternatively, if you're buying skins on third-party sites like the ones I just mentioned, you need to consider potential deposit fees, often around 3%, and sales or withdrawal fees. This 5 to 15%, depending on where you're buying and selling, can eat away at your margins. Ultimately, I cannot just give you profitable trade-ups because they'll quickly become unprofitable with the number of people who see it, and there's no one set of combinations that always works. You need to find combinations yourself, hopefully in collections and price ranges that other people aren't looking for, as that will give you the best chance at finding the inputs you need. I suggest starting with some of the sites I mentioned earlier, such as Trade Up Lab and Trade Up Spy. Take a look at their float combinations, then go through CSGO skins and figure out which skins are float capped and how you could exploit this. Even once you find a profitable trade up, try adding in some higher float items to the mix to see where you could squeeze out a higher margin. If you find a trade up with a good EV, you should buy as many items for that trade up as your budget can allow. Because remember, it's all about playing the odds. Even with a positive EV, you might get unlucky in your first few, so it's really over the long run that you will hit the averages. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It does take time, patience, and even with winning combinations, you'll be limited by your budget or simply the number of skins available. I have more trade up videos coming in the future, so be sure to subscribe and check out this video next where I risked $12,000 on knife trade ups and got extremely lucky. Best of luck and take care of yourselves.